Welcome. Hi, my name's Cathy Fromme, and welcome to this session on Better at What You Do, Mindfulness, and Other Attributes of Your Best Self. So good to be with you, and I'm sorry we can't do that in person. I'm in Lacey, Washington, Olympia, Washington, and it's currently raining and pretty gray and cold. Being in Riverside with you would be pretty fun. Let's get going on this session. I'm pretty excited about sharing this, and let me just before we get into it, give you just a minute to read this poem by Maggie Smith. Maggie's young daughter asked her, what's the future? What is future? And this was her response to her young daughter. Um, Take a peek. I've highlighted in blue the sections that I think are relevant to our conversation today, and take just a second. So for me in this poem and about what we're going to talk about, mindfulness, better attribute, bringing your best self to your work and to your life. I love Maggie's words. The trick of the future is that it's empty, a cup before you pour the water. The future is a waiting cup. And for all it knows, you'll fill it with milk instead. Every minute carries you forward, conveys you into a space you'll fill. I mean, the future will be full of you. It's one step beyond the step you're taking now. What you say next until you say it. So, this session is going to be about bringing your best self to the work that you do. This is the ADR conference. Many of you are special educators or work in special education, have children in the classroom. So let me just say, even though this is relevant to the work that we do, what I'm going to talk about today is relevant to our lives as human beings. Bringing your best self is important to bringing your best self to your family, to your neighbors, to your community, to your significant others, to your workplace. We're talking about being our best selves all the time. And so, in the short time that I have with you, I'd like to go over a growth mindset and agility, the age of agility, being mindful, demonstrating trust, vulnerability, empathy, integrity, benevolence, and a little bit about resilience. So this session isn't about special education specifically. It's about being a better you. Also going to talk about the trust attributes. I've been presenting with the ADR conference since, I don't know, 211, 212, so for quite some times. And many of you have heard me talk about the trust types and the trust attributes. Demonstrating trustworthiness with competence, openness, concern, benevolence, caring, reliability, and honesty and integrity. Those are parts of our best self. Mindfulness, resilience, and what we're going to talk about today are also parts of our best self. And so, why is this so important? Because it's all about your health. I'm going to demonstrate to you that mindfulness really is a healthy alternative to the stresses that hit us in the work that we do. So a healthy you is a better you. And a better you is all about better relationships with your significant other, your children, your colleagues, your neighbors, and the people you interact with. Better relationships and better decisions are about better services for students. So I consider this opportunity in this next hour a great opportunity for you to reset. 2020 was a pretty rough year for many. And the work that you do in education, specifically special education, made it, I think, even a little tougher. So here's an opportunity to reset, sit back, think for a second, reflect on how you're going to individually and collectively bring your best self to the work that we do. So let's start with the age of agility and a growth mindset. Carol Dweck has written an awful lot in terms of fixed mindset, growth mindset. This whole notion of a growth mindset is uh, one that intelligence can be developed. We can learn this. A growth mindset is a commitment and a desire to learn and to be better than what we already are. A growth mindset embraces challenges and persists in the face of setbacks versus a fixed mindset who gives up easily. I can't do it. It's not going to work. It's too hard. A growth mindset, beyond persisting and having perseverance, sees the effort in the work they do as a path to mastery. And a growth mindset learns from criticism, which is hard for all of us, versus a fixed mindset that says, I know everything I need to know. There's nothing you can tell me that's going to change my mind. Plus, I don't want to hear what you have to say. It's useless. And ignores any kind of feedback that is about improvement. A growth mindset finds lessons and inspiration in the success of others, where a fixed mindset is threatened by the success of others. Growth mindset folks, people who are open to learning, willing to persevere and stick with it, are higher achievers. They reach their goals and what they want. So what we're going to talk about here is going to require a growth mindset on your part. Again, this is an opportunity to reset. Even if you are a person that's pretty open to learning and has a strong growth mindset, the way I look at life is every day is another day to get better. So for me, here's another opportunity to learn a little bit more and to bring my best self to the work that I do. So a couple of years ago, there was a report that came out titled "The Age of Agility," and it was about the workforce in the United States. And the report was basically saying that the U.S. is unprepared. The U.S. employees, workers, are unprepared for the changes that are coming forth in our workforce. They said that to thrive, workers need to get comfortable with uncertainty, embrace flexibility, and reset their expectations. So we know that automation is increasing in the workforce, and automation has for hundreds of years taken over some jobs. The good thing to know is that we always come back with other jobs that fill that. Excuse me. The report also talks about schools. They say that great schools are good business. They're good for business. And that the K-12 system needs to be prepared for radical societal and workforce changes. We know that. We're simply not prepared, is what they're saying. So going forward, everyone has to take ownership for a continuous cycle of learning. Continuous cycle of learning. And relearning and finding different work. That means you and I, continuous cycle. I'll tell you, I just went through my continuous cycle of learning, how to record Zoom with captions and all kinds of stuff. It would have been a lot easier to present in person and a lot funner, because then we could have talked about it. So this whole notion of a continuous cycle of learning. What the Age of Agility is talking about is this continuous cycle of learning and adaptability and adjusting, because we're moving towards automation. But that also means that there's an increased need for the soft skills that we have in the workplace. And those soft skills are all about creative, critical thinking, being highly agile, comfortable in diverse environments, being adaptable. That's that growth mindset, tenacity, empathy for others, getting along with others, and handling stress. These are the mindfulness attributes that we're going to talk about. So working through these soft skills is really important. So this is so important that some companies are already starting to hire based on soft skills, not on the technical skills they need. As an example, Subaru, the car maker Subaru, they will now hire people for a 4-week training to be a part of their company. It's like the orientation training that they would start any employee with. They pay them for this training, and after 4 weeks, that's when they officially hire you to stay on. The belief being that these soft skill attributes are the attributes they want people to come with. They can teach anyone how to build a Subaru, put a widget in a hole. These are harder attributes to come by. So they watch over the course of those 4 weeks. And if you pass those 4 weeks with these skills, then they invite you to stay on and be a part of the Subaru family. In my next session, if you're so inclined, it's a research-based session around organizational models that actually talk about the companies that are looking at the human attributes, the humanness of who we are before they hire, um, with regard to the technical knowledge that you have. Soft skills very important. So here's the part about this that I ask you to be open about. So we ask our students, at least in Washington we do, we work a lot on social emotional learning and growth mindset for an unknown future, helping kids learn that the effort they put in now will help them in the future, and acquiring soft skills. If we're asking that of us, our students, why would we not be asking the same of ourselves and our staff? So I really encourage you to think through this notion about you. This session is about you. Where are you in terms of a growth mindset and your openness to what we're going to be talking about here coming up, mindfulness. Uh, Here's the part that's just, I can't emphasize enough. The most exciting, John Naisbitt says it well, the most exciting breakthroughs of the 21st century will occur not because of technology, and we know we're getting automated, but because of an expanding concept of what it means to be human. And that's why we're talking about mindfulness. So bringing your best self, a growth mindset, we just talked about what that was, and agility, being agile and flexible as we move forth into this new age of agility. Let's talk about being mindful. Actually, though, before we do that, let's talk about how your brain works. I know you know this already. You're all educators. This is just a review. Life has stressors. We all live in a world in which there are any number of things that stress us. The world at large has been stressed by COVID. It has been uh, a huge stress, to say the least, for any number of us. So we all respond differently to the little and the big stressors. We've all responded differently to COVID. But the way we all respond the same is that when a stressor hits us, there is an influx of hormones to our brain. A few of those are adrenaline, dopamine, cortisol. And in this case, you're out hiking on a hiking trail and you see a bear. That's a stressor. And I'm going to use that example just as an example. But we know all kinds of little stressors in the workplace and big stressors in the workplace. So there's a stressor. Your brain is flooded with adrenaline, dopamine, and cortisol. That initial hormone dump lasts for about 60 to 90 seconds, the big one. And that's what gets you moving to do what, however you're going to respond, fight, flight, or freeze, or whatever it is. We're going to talk about that in a second. Though after it subsides 60 or 90 seconds, those hormones stay in your system at least for another 20 minutes, sometimes longer. There are other hormones as well. We just don't have time to talk about it. But then you eventually get back down to your baseline. So a stress response. When you get that initial hormone dump and that initial stress response, you have an increased heart rate, you have constricted pupils, you have tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, you don't hear everything, you're just like focused on what's there. If you've been in an accident, you know this feeling: sweating, increased circulation, fast, shallow breath, tense muscles. We all respond that way. So stress hits us, boom, that's what happens to our body. Now, here, when we're in those stress situations, you see a bear. Let's take the bear example. There's three pretty typical stress reactions. One, we fight. I'm sure you all know, though, don't fight the bear. That's not the best response. Though an initial reaction for some in a stress situation is to fight. That's active resistance, ready to battle, defensiveness, and wanting to be in control, being large. Second response that we are wired as human beings to do is flight. We run. There's an active aversion to what's happening. We're non-combative, there's fear, and we're out of there. Another possible reaction is freezing. There's a paralysis of action. We suppress our own needs and feelings. We make ourselves small. Our vocal cords, we can't scream, are suppressed. We disassociate with our surroundings. Now, all of these are useful in any number of different situations. The question is, which situation is best? These are typical stress reactions once that influx of hormones hits you, and we're wired for that. So a stressor hits, you respond a certain way, and then the stress is mitigated most times. Let's talk about stress for just a second. There's three types of stress. Whether or not you freeze at stress, or whether or not you fight at stress or run. There are three types of stress in the mental health community that they speak of. One is positive stress, which is what most of us experience in a regular day. It's a brief increase in your heart rate, mild elevation in those stress hormones, and then back to baseline. And we're going to talk about that baseline in just a second. Then there is tolerable stress, serious temporary stress responses that temporary, so they're not brief, and they're a little more elevated, but they're buffered by supportive relationships, people in your life that help calm you down. And then there's toxic stress, which is prolonged activation of stress response systems. I volunteer as a dependency guardian ad litem for the court system here in Thurston County, and work with a lot of foster kids and families for placement of those children. And a lot of those kids are experiencing toxic stress, prolonged activation of stress for being in abusive situations, whether physically or sexually, living with adults who are drug or alcoholic dependent, having no care, having physical abuse, and living in toxic relationships. Let me show you what that does to you biologically. So again, we all have stress in our life, whatever that is. It could be, flying on a plane and the kid in back of you kicking your seat for an hour on the plane, or 2 hours on the plane. Or it could be seeing a bear on your daily hike, or it could be an abusive situation. So remember, I said there's three types of stress. Positive stress is that brief increase in heart rate and mild elevation. So most of us, this is where we're at for any number of stressors. The stressor hits you, you're at your baseline in terms of your sympathetic system. And we're not going to talk about the parasitic sympathetic system. This isn't a biology class. We don't have time to talk about that. But here's what happened. The stressor hits, increased elevation in hormones, quick, the surge, 60, 90 seconds, coming down back to baseline pretty quickly within 20 or so minutes, even though there's hormones still in your system. This is the range of tolerance. We have not even hit your upper threshold for stress tolerance. Pretty normal, quick increase, back down to baseline. Positive stress. This is the stress that you have knowing that you have a report due next week and you haven't started it. Tolerable stress is a stressor hitting you. That increase in hormones, cortisol being one of those, goes beyond the upper threshold of one's range of tolerance. So heart rate increases, pupil dilation, selective hearing and seeing lasts a little longer, comes down to within this tolerable range of stress, but we never come back down to the baseline. It's tolerable. It's still not healthy. High cortisol levels over the course of time are high increased heart rate, high tense muscles, high elevation of these hormones in your body are not great. Dopamine is one of those hormones and adrenaline that you experience here. But high cortisol is not good here. So tolerable stress means that this stress, this being in this area is buffered by supportive relationships, whether they're significant others, coaches, counselors, friends, colleagues. There are people in your life that support you, that are help you come down to a workable level of stress. Over the course of time, this is not healthy. We have children in foster care. You have children in your schools who are in this position. Now, I'm going to tell you why you don't want to be here. The same thing I told you at the very beginning of our time together. This is not healthy. This is not a good place to bring your best self. And I'll show you in a minute why it doesn't, it just gets worse. Toxic stress, we talked about, that's the third type of stress, said that the stressor hits you, throws you way up over the upper threshold. You are no longer in the range of tolerance. You're way up here, high hormone levels of cortisol, high increased heart rate, high all of those responses that you have, and it's prolonged. You may, after that initial hormone surge, come down, but you don't even come down below the lower threshold. This is why trauma-informed instruction, as a sidestep here, is really important in our schools. If you have a student who has toxic stress, lots of abuse at home, lots of neglect, or for whatever reason, a victim of trauma, they are up in this upper threshold because they're always on constant alert. They're always on fight or flight or freeze, mostly flight or freeze, become disassociated from their environment. So this toxic level for those kiddos, they're up here because oftentimes they don't have a support system to bring them back down. A very unhealthy place to be. We don't have a lot of time to talk about that, but here's the example. Positive stress we can deal with. Tolerable stress, we're not our best selves, but we're not the Hulk. And this is toxic stress, because in toxic stress, you simply do not think well here. Toxic stress means that you are increased heart rate, constricted pupils, tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, sweating, increased circulation, tense muscles. You are not at your best here. Whether you're a child in a classroom or an adult in a meeting, which most of us don't get to this stage, let's be honest. That said, even being in this stage, tolerable stress doesn't let us be our best selves. And this is why we're going to get to mindfulness, because mindfulness will help us get back to our baseline. So here's the part to remember, whether it's a child you're dealing with who is at a toxic level of stress, a colleague, a significant other, or whoever, as that this person, remember, the Hulk is a good guy. He's a Marvel hero. He's a good soul, and so are you. Stressors sometimes put us in a position we're not able to deal with. Now, again, I'm gonna believe that most of us in our workplaces are only dealing with other individuals who are victims of trauma, or abuse, and we're responding to this in them. Thing to remember is these are good folks who simply are literally biologically, physically out of control. You don't think well here, bringing you down, which is why having supportive others, a trusted other, friends, significant others that when you are here, bring you back down to where you want to be. This is unhealthy for you as a human being to stay at this level for a long time. So when you're mindful, you can see something for what it is. Whoa, I'm a little stressed, and you can be intentional about your response. That's what this is about. And again, that's not to say that anyone necessarily is here. We simply just always want to be our best selves. So being mindful also means that you have a notion of who you are here. When you're stressed, is this you? Do you run, avoid, ignore, or do you totally just act like what's happening doesn't exist? You disassociate with your surroundings. Either way, either one of these responses don't get us the best results, any of these. And so that's what we're going to talk about next. I'm going to talk about how to be mindful to move beyond those initial stress responses. And or if you have engaged one of them, to bring you back down to your baseline sooner than not. That's resilience, coming back to your baseline. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So, what is mindfulness? Well, mindfulness simply means paying attention to what's happening now. There's a bear on my trail, on my hiking trail. It's about being fully present, and you can be mindful by using one or all of your senses. So, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What was just said? Even what do you smell? The house is on fire, so be mindful. Oh, the house is on fire. There's no judgment in mindfulness. It's simply an observation. Oftentimes, we typically jump into that judgment mode, but really it's an observation, what you saw, what you heard, and it's wrapping your arms around that observation about how great you're feeling at that moment, how crummy you might be feeling, or that your buttons are being pushed. Whatever it is, it's about wrapping your arms around that and simply being mindful about it. There's a psychologist, Joan Rosenberg, who has, I think, a great analogy for metaphor for mindfulness. She says it's like riding a wave. It could be a rough wave, a mild wave, or one of those slow rolling waves that doesn't even get you into shore. But she said, it's like riding a wave. So it's about being aware of that 60 or 90-minute hormonal surge and riding that wave. Practice helps you ride the wave and helps you feel more centered, calm, and at ease. Acknowledging and putting your arms around whatever that stressor is, riding the initial wave, and knowing that you'll get back down to your baseline in 20 minutes or so helps you with your initial response to what's happening. It's simply about grounding yourself around what's happening. So the notion is, I think in the work that I do, and when I'm working with groups, when we most need to have a conversation, we often do our worst. We either revert to silence or violence, any of these responses. That's because it's natural. We're built for fight or flight. Back in the cave years, when our ancestors were being attacked by a saber-toothed tiger, this is what was built into us. But that doesn't mean that we can't regulate it and can't control it in this new world. We don't have saber-toothed tigers. Well, they just look different now, I guess, don't they? But when we're in this mode, and even in this mode, there's no blood to your brain. It goes to your large muscles. You don't think at your best. And we don't make our best decisions when we're in this mode. So again, I guess I ask you, whoops, this is what happens when you work at home here. I'm going to do a quick reset, I'm going to ask you, how do you practice, what kind of leader do you want to be? One that reacts quickly or one that is thoughtful? I'm going to leave that little mistake in here because that is life. And I'm going to show you how to be resilient and move on. It happened and it's over. So how do you practice being mindful? If this is so important to be mindful and aware in this and have a growth mindset, how do you practice it? Well, I'm going to use this example of a ladder of inference to help us do it. The ladder of inference is just a graphic, a framework for how we go from what we see and hear to taking actions. And in a ladder of inference, we see or hear something, we take selected data, we make meaning of it, we have assumptions around that, we draw conclusions, beliefs, and actions. Some of us do that in what I call 0 to 60 miles in 5 seconds. Being mindful would mean you're going to take a lot longer to get up to the action stage of what you're doing. So let's talk about this ladder of inference. We select, we see or hear something, we select from those observations. Largely, we select based on our experience, what we want to hear. Remember, when a stressor hits you, we have selective hearing, tunnel vision. We don't always see everything. We see what we want to see and our experience tells us. So staying down here for a little while helps us be clear about really what we're seeing. We make meaning of that data, and from that meaning, we make assumptions based on what we think we saw. Then we draw conclusions. We adopt beliefs based on those conclusions, and then we take actions. We make decisions. And when we do that based on a stressor, we're often not taking actions in the best interest of ourselves or others. So let's talk about this. Being mindful means staying down at the first rung of the ladder for quite a while. Listen and observe. Ask yourself. I mean, this takes time. We're not used to doing these things. Most of us. Ask yourself, why would a reasonable, rational person respond or act this way? Or say that? What actually happened? Replay it in your mind. See everything. Go slower. What actually was said? What did you hear? And what did you see? You're still down at the bottom rung of the ladders. Be fully present. Because when you're fully present, that means you're going to hold your seat and ride the wave. Hang on to it. Go with that initial, somebody just pushed your buttons. Wrap your arms around the threat or whatever's pushing your buttons. Acknowledge it and be with it. Oh, okay. This guy's just pushing my buttons. All right. No judgment, good, bad, right, or wrong. You're still at the bottom rung here. Observations. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about mind-body integration here and being fully present and practicing gratitude and moving. So being mindful, most of us think of it in terms of what Hoke is doing here. That is being mindful. It's a wonderful practice. And I'm going to be honest with you, I have been trying to integrate mindfulness into my life probably for the last 20 years. It's hard for me. I am not the expert on this. I'm coming to you as a person learning with you and trying to share my experiences to help you be a better you, because I think it's helped me be a better me. So mindfulness is about mind-body integration. So when your buttons are being pushed and you're still at that bottom rung, this is the time to be present again. Hold on to it, ride the wave. And maybe sometimes these are strategies. You could stand up and just move for a minute. Sometimes I'm in a meeting and we're all sitting around the table when we used to do that, not in a Zoom meeting. But you can still do it in a Zoom. You can stand up and you can move. You can just physically be aware that your buttons are being pushed and you physically respond in a way that's appropriate. I would sometimes pace back and forth in a room just so I can think and be more reflective. Mindfulness is about self-regulation. So when I am riding that wave and I take the time to think about it, I can do a number of things. And you can do these in a meeting, and you can do these in public, and you can do it in private. Chant, count, or breathe. And I'm just going to take just a few minutes to talk about each one of those. This is really important. And again, I'm not a yogi. I don't do this a lot. I do it every day. And I have to be intentional about it. This doesn't come easy for me. So if you're a person like me, um, you'll understand why this is hard. I'm going to be vulnerable here, and I'm going to practice some of these and show you my techniques that I use. So the biggest one I use is breathing. And I do this even in a meeting when I think my buttons are being pushed, or before I go into a meeting with a difficult person. And that's just breathing. There are many techniques for breathing and being mindful about your body and self-regulating yourself. I'm going to just show you the easiest one and show you that you could even do it in a meeting. And it's breathing. You would breathe in 4 counts, hold it 4 counts, and then breathe out 4 counts. So breathe in, hold it for 4 counts, breathe out, holding it for 4 counts. I'm going to do it again, but I'm going to count for you and just want you to just practice it with me real quick. So breathing in 4 counts, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it for 4 counts. That was 2, 3, 4. Now breathe out through your mouth. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes when I breathe, I have a little chant that I say. In that little chant, when I breathe in, my body is calm. So I breathe in 4 counts, saying to myself, my body is calm. I count 4 counts holding it, and then I breathe out. And when I breathe out, I say, thank you, thank you, thank you. Just the practice of gratitude. And I'm thankful that I'm there and that I'm healthy and I'm well. What that breathing does is it puts your focus on something entirely different than what just pushed your button. It brings you back down to a calmer baseline so that then you can respond to the comment or remark that pushed your button or the action. So you can breathe, you can count to 10 to yourself. You don't have to do all this public and stop, but you can do these in meetings or before meeting and simply just count to 10 if someone says something. Counting is something we use with little kids when they get upset. Count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Those 10 seconds have already brought you down from that hormonal surge and is bringing you back down to your baseline. You want to be at your baseline because that's where you think best. And then let me just give you another quick one, a chant. Again, you can go onto mindfulness apps. There are trainings. There are all kinds of things that people, far more versed in this area than I can share with you. That said, even just little attempts at this can help bring you down. So to a healthy baseline. A chant, one of the chants that I learned was just a chant. And sometimes I do this in the car. Sometimes while I'm waiting for my coffee, I just chant it to myself. I'm safe, I'm healthy, I'm happy, and I'm at ease. The chant, the way I learned it was, may I be safe, may I be healthy, may I be happy, and may I be at ease. But I think when I say it in the present, it's more meaningful to me. You come up with whatever chant you want or whatever works for you. But oftentimes, just before I go into a pretty difficult conversation, I practice my chant. I'm safe, I'm healthy, I'm happy, and I'm at ease. And just try to bring myself to a baseline and be present and acknowledge where I'm at. So be present, practice gratitude for mind body integration, move. Sometimes movement, you don't even have to stand up. Movement can even be simply sitting up taller in your chair. In the work that we do, we're in a lot of meetings. There's a lot going on. A lot of stressors are hitting us. I often find myself scrunched over my computer, and if I'm intentional, if I stop to breathe and take a second, I straighten myself up, I take a deep breath, and get my shoulders back. And I'm very intentional about sitting taller with my lower back and everything. All of that is mind body integration. Be present, feel where you're at and who you're at. And you can make it as simple as you'd like and or complicated. Truly, mind body integration and self-regulation has lots of good practice in 20, 40, 60-minute sessions where you're actually sitting and trying to do this. Not always something to do at work, but you can do a couple of minutes at work. So remember, we're still at the bottom rung of that ladder of inference, holding space for the other person and holding space for yourself. These are strategies that you can do in the moment. So that's when you're observing what's happened, you're selecting your data, you are being mindful, and you are still down here. Then you start to move up to the rung of the ladder, and you want to make meaning of what you heard, and there are assumptions around that. Making meaning is really important because we typically use our past experiences for that. So think through your options, talk through it with a trusted other. We don't always have to take action right away. Call someone, a colleague, talk to them. Here's what I think I heard in what happened. Learn the other person's story. And you know this from mediation. This is about narration, where each person gets to tell their side of the story. Learning the other person's story is the difference between position and interest, and the difference between coming to resolution or a win-win and not. So learning the other person's story is always what we're doing in difficult conversations. We're trying to come to a common pool of understanding, and you can't do that if you're only operating from your side of the story. We see this today in society and politics and everything that's happening. We are not learning the other person's story, and we can't come to resolution, win-win or win-lose even. We're mostly at win-lose until we learn the other person's story. Be intentional about your response. You cannot be intentional if you're at a tolerable level of stress or toxic. Tolerable maybe, but not toxic. So even at this stage, making meaning and assumptions, there is something that we can do, and there's another strategy or skill set when you're learning the other person's story and when you're trying to make meaning. And that's a reframing to make sure that you have heard correctly and that you've understood correctly. Remember the whole notion of impact versus intent. Sometimes speakers say something that they don't really mean. The meaning that comes through is not what they mean. So reframing, you all know about that, but it simply takes the speaker's message, the person that pushed your button, and changes its direction from a position to an interest, from the past to the future, and from negative to neutral. So some starters for reframing is, oh, Cathy, I see it's important to you that boom, 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 and then you fill in the blank. Or what you would like to see happen is, that tells the other person that you've heard them and that you are listening to them. And that is the beginning of understanding and also keeping you at the rung of the ladder instead of going up and coming to conclusions and creating a belief system around something that has been misunderstood or was not the intent of the other person. So as you move up the rungs of the ladder to beliefs and conclusion, now you really are holding space for the other, and you're telling yourself a different story up here than you did if you were not riding the wave and that you immediately reacted and responded. So a different story is then a different action and reaction. Then finally, you get to the top rung of the ladder, and you can be more intentional about your response. And if necessary, you can even have a difficult conversation. So it's important to every step of the way be intentional about what's happening. Hold on to your chair, ride the wave, and be mindful about what you're doing, slowing this whole process down. So here's the thing. If you're a person who goes from 0 to 60 in 10 seconds, or if you did that, go back. If this is what's happening to you, that doesn't mean you can't fix what happened. So you go back, you think about what actually happened. What did you do? You go back through that whole ladder of inference process, and you ask yourself, is this the response that I wanted? Did I get the results I wanted? And what do you want that you're not getting? And this is a place to ask yourself, what might you have done differently? Here's where the growth mindset comes in. Maybe I could have done that differently. And if I could have, can I do that? It's an opportunity to apologize or to forgive the other. Remember, we're holding space for the other. And it's an opportunity to move to a new action. So this is hard work. Being human is hard. But being mindful creates an environment that's conducive to more opportunities for building strong social capital. So remember, strong social capital and supporting others and having an environment in which we all do that is important to the work that we do. But being mindful is mostly important because it's a healthier you, and it allows you to bring a better you to where you're at. Let's talk for just a second about resilience. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with that. Resilience is our capacity for regulating the time it takes for us to get back down to that baseline. Yeah, there it is. So you have a stressor, and remember, I told you positive stress is the range of tolerance. We all have different skills and practices and coping mechanisms for resilience, for getting ourselves back down to this baseline, which we want to do. And this, again, is positive stress. This is okay. This happens during the course of the day. So resilience, again, is the capacity for regulating the time it takes for you to get back down to your baseline and able to think. Even this is resilience too, in that you can come from the upper threshold of stress to at least a workable area of stress. And here's the part that's, where we're different. People process stress and trauma based on many different factors. There are past episodes of toxic stress and trauma in their life, or current, they may be experiencing an abusive relationship, a colleague of yours, and their relationships with others who keep them safe, nurtured, respond to their needs is important. So remember, this is what truly helps people in tolerable stress situations come down to closer to the baseline. We all have very different innate coping mechanisms and genetics. And here's the other part. Ongoing toxic stress and trauma don't allow us to get back to the baseline. It's a lot harder to be resilient when it's ongoing. Here's where we're all experiencing ongoing stress. COVID is a perfect example. It's really hard when we have been in this COVID tunnel for just almost a year now. By the time you are listening to this session, it'll be a year that we've been in this COVID tunnel. That's ongoing toxic stress. Being present, acknowledging it, and then being reflective about and mindful about what you're going to do about it is important to your health, important to your work, your decision making, and your relationships. and important to the results. This relationship that we're talking about, again, can be a friend, a colleague, a family member, significant other, a trusted other, but make sure that you have people in your life who can help you with the stress that you deal with. You can learn to be more resilient. There has been research and studies around this, a lot of studies around children in trauma and stress. We can teach resilience. We don't have a lot of time. I don't have a lot of time left, but this is important to know. You can build resilience through self-regulation. Again, self-regulation is part of being mindful. It's one of the social emotional skills that we teach children. And we could build resilience through conceptualization, skill acquisition, and application. Conceptualization is mindfulness, knowing your triggers. It's a whole lot more than that, but in the time that we have, and I'm trying to keep this at a simple level, we don't all have to become yogis. That said, we could all learn how to be more mindful and knowing what our triggers are. Because when you know what your trigger is, you really can ride the wave better because you know what's happening. You can even prep yourself for that wave. Skill acquisition, we talked about that, breathing, counting, chanting, self-awareness, and application and practice. Now, I'm not suggesting that we all go in the Hulk mode every time we have a stressor, but that is one of the possibilities, and the extent to which we do is always important. So learning resilience, learning calm, contemplative, mindful decision-making is important to your best health and your best outcomes. So here's the deal. I know you know about mindfulness, and that we've all heard about it, and we know about counting and chanting and all those things, but people have to behave their way into new ideas and skills. You can't just think your way into it. I have to tell you, I've been working very hard at being mindful and integrating my mind, body for a number of years now. And it doesn't come naturally for me. I'm going to be vulnerable here and share that with you. But there are ways to incorporate new habits into your life. So there's this wonderful book, Tiny Habits, The Small Changes That Change Everything, written by a behavioral scientist over in Stanford University. And the basis of her book is building habits. So building a habit takes anywhere from at least 20, 21 days, 3 weeks. She says, take any new habit that you want to build into your life, mindfulness, let's say, scale it back and make it small, as simple and tiny as possible. So what's simple and tiny? I just showed you a little bit ago. Breathing exercise is simple and tiny. Chanting is simple and tiny. And we can incorporate those into our lives. So let's say you want breathing and chanting. Find where it fits in your existing routine before or after another habit. So in the case of you all, your existing routine often has meetings, sometimes with difficult people, phone calls that you have to make that you don't want to make. I'm just taking a small example. So before you make your phone call, with the phone in your hand, picking it up, you chant, I'm safe, I'm happy, I'm healthy, and I'm at ease. I'm safe, I'm happy, I'm healthy, and I'm at ease. Or you take a couple of deep breaths. You do the breathing exercise. Breathe in for a count of 4. I'm calming my body. 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all that I have. Whatever your chants are. But you could do those tiny little exercises versus 20, 40 minutes in the morning or in the evening for mindfulness exercises, which is still really good. But the tininess helps you because then you start realizing, oh, and you do it at one phone call, then you do it at another phone call, or before another meeting, deep breathing, or in a meeting, your button is pushed and you silently sit there and practice some breathing. You don't have to close your eyes. No one has to know you're doing it. But find out what you want to do, scale it back, make it tiny and small, fit it into an existing routine, and then celebrate with a positive emotion. That celebration wires in the habit. So you get off the phone or you finish the chant and it's like, yeah, that went well. Because the more you do that, then the more you'll come back to it. I got to tell you, small habits make a difference, even for exercise. If you're a person, here we are in March coming up. If you've had New Year's resolutions to do more exercising, tiny is the way to go. Oftentimes, if I'm standing in front of the microwave, reheating my tea or my coffee there for a minute, I'll do some of my yoga poses and moves. 1 minute, I'm fitting tiny habits into an existing habit, reheating my coffee, and I'm making use of that time to the point where sometimes after the microwave beeps and my coffee is done, I'll stay there and do a few more exercises for a couple of minutes, which is what you want to do. Small habits then become big habits. So this ladder of inference, staying down at the bottom couple of rungs before you move up is really important. And then let me start to wind down because I'm running out of time here. So your number one job is to take care of each other. That means being mindful, intentional of your interactions, practicing a growth mindset, being open to the learning, be tenacious about your learning, put in the effort and mastery. So being mindful means putting in some effort about how you want to bring yourself back down to a baseline. And we're always about building relationships and strong social capital. So attributes of your best self are those trustworthiness attributes that we've talked about before, as well as these mindfulness, growth, mindset, being flexible attributes. We know that there's a strong correlation between the quality of the relationships between the adults in the system and the outcomes of that system. There's a strong correlation between the outcomes in special ed students, their learning and improved learning based on the relationships of you, the adults in the system. I'm going to leave you with this. Actions are important. On a daily basis, trust is raised or diminished depending on whether our actions are consistent with the expectations that we've agreed to. So in other words, through our words and actions, we show our sense of obligations towards others and discern these intentions. That ladder of inference is a perfect way to show your words and actions by being mindful as you move up that ladder before you make your actions be intentional about how you got there. And we continue then to build strong social capital, which is simply the inclinations to do things for others. And your inclinations to do things for others comes from your mindful awareness of where you're at and how you're responding to the world at large and the stressors that hit you. So I'm going to come back and leave you with this poem. And again, remind you that the trick of the future is that it's empty. So we've been through a rough 2020. 2021 started out a little shaky, and here we are in March 2021. The trick of the future is that it's empty, a cup before you pour the water. The future is a waiting cup, and for all it knows, you'll fill it with milk instead. What's in your future? What small new mindfulness habit will you build into your routine? What will you pour into your cup? And so with that, I want to thank you for the time that you've taken to be in this session today. If you have questions or comments, or you just want to talk about this, totally open to that. My email is on the very first slide of this PowerPoint. And I want to wish you all the very best in your work. Stay safe, be mindful, be intentional, and be open to lots of new learnings, because that's where we're at these days. And I so look forward to seeing you in person next year in being in sunny Riverside to be with you. And thank you in advance for completing your evaluation. Greatly appreciate your time. Take good care. And now I need to